Hi, my name is JD and this is my channel Frost and Forest. Today I'm going to be doing a tarot tag that is called Favorite Jean Decks. I'm doing this one because I thought it might be a good way to introduce myself a little bit more to tarot tubes. So I thought this would be a good way to kind of show you some of the decks that I use a lot, that I find comforting, that are some of my favorites. So yeah, let's get started. So the first category in this tag is a well-worn sweater, a deck that wraps you in quiet wisdom. And so for this one, I chose the Creatures Oracle. The reason I chose this one is that this is one of my very favorite Oracle decks ever. It is always, kind of gives me the message that I need to hear. And it's beautiful, and it has both, positive and negative cards. And it's a deck that I know really, really well. And it's one of my favorites. So this is what I chose for a well-worn sweater, the Creatures Oracle. Okay, so prompt number 2 is a familiar walking path, a deck that knows where you're headed before you do. And for this one, I chose the Cosmovisions. It technically calls itself an Oracle deck, but it's basically a tarot deck. And this is one that I absolutely love. This is another one of my very favorite decks. And I chose this one for this prompt because this deck always sends me in the right direction. And it's always easy for me to understand. And it's beautiful. So I wanted to share it again. So this was my choice for a familiar walking path. And this is the Cosmovisions. Okay, so prompt number 3 is Warm Socks on a Cold Floor, a deck that grounds you in comfort. And for this one, I chose the Greenwich Tarot. This is another one of my very favorite decks. I tend to use it in the fall, kind of starting in August when it's starting to turn fallish, and then kind of use it through into Christmas holidays because it feels like a very festive deck to me, focusing on, people and people coming together. And so part of the reason why I chose it for this particular prompt is because I'm always so excited when I pull it out again in August. I don't really use it for a good chunk of the year, and then I pull it out and I remember how much I really like it. And so that's always fun. And so this is my choice for Warm Socks on the Floor, the Greenwich Tarot. So the next prompt is Your Grandmother's Recipe Box, a deck that holds generational wisdom. And so for this one, I had to choose the Herb Crafter's Tarot. So the reason I chose this one is because, well, one, it talks about grandmother's recipes, and both my grandmothers contributed to helping me learn how to cook. They were, they did a lot of work in that area. And so whenever I cook, especially certain things, I'm always thinking about my grandmothers. The other reason that this connects to this deck is I have sometimes in the past when I've made a really nice meal, a meal that, is for friends or for family, bringing everybody together, I sometimes like to pull a card around the time of making that meal. And so I use this specific deck to do that. And so for me, it made a lot of sense that this would work for Your Grandmother's Recipe Box, because both my grandmothers taught me how to cook, and I use this deck when I'm in the kitchen. So prompt number 5 is a window seat on a stormy day, a deck that makes space for shadow work. So for this one, I chose the Lantern Oracle. And so the reason I chose this one is, you know, I'm not one to do much shadow work, but this deck has also been really helpful when I'm trying to look at things a little bit differently and get different perspectives on things, especially more negative things. So I would definitely call this, you know, into this category. You know, for example, this card, Trusting Tricksters, came up when I was thinking about different relationships in my life and, you know, setting boundaries. And so for the little bit of shadow work that I've done, this deck has been what I've used. So this is my pick for the window seat on a stormy day. So for prompt number 6, it's that one pair of jeans you never have to think about, a deck that just gets you without trying. And so for me, I chose the Ophidia Rosa Tarot. And so you might think that this is kind of a strange choice for this prompt, just because this deck is so pippy and it doesn't seem super intuitive. But for me, this deck just works. I got this relatively early in my tarot collecting, and I got it in a trade, and it was just like, well, you know, I will try it. I was a little worried about it because it is so pippy, and I was relatively new to getting back into tarot. And so, you know, I really was unsure. But this deck kind of challenged me a little bit, and it just worked for me. And so it's kind of the first time that it showed me that I had gotten to the place of memorizing what the cards mean, and I could just kind of look at the cards to get an understanding of them as well. And so it was kind of my first step in that way, and I just kind of got it, even though I didn't think I would. And so that's why I chose the Ophidia Rosa for that one pair of jeans you never have to think about. Number 7 is your chipped but perfect coffee cup, a deck that doesn't need you to be fancy to show up. And so for this one, I chose the Guided Field Guide to Garden Dragons. And the reason I chose this one is because it is not a particularly fancy deck. It is pretty cute, and it is pretty, you know, childish almost. But it was one of the first Oracle decks that I ever bought, and it is also one of my most used Oracle decks every year. And so even though it's not particularly fancy, it is beautiful, it gets the job done, it has great keywords, and it is just always a deck that I can just pull out and use. Prompt number 8 is that book that you've read so many times the pages are falling out, a deck that knows all your stories and loves you anyway. And so for this one, I chose the Lightseers Tarot. And I chose this one because this was my very first tarot deck that I got when I got back into tarot in 2021. Not only was I dealing with the pandemic like everybody else was, but I had some other stuff going on in my life, and I just kind of came back to tarot at that point. And so this was the first deck that I got when I came back to it. And so because of that, it'll always have a special place in my collection. This is one of my first attempts at edging a deck. So you can see I edged it, I think it was in like green Sharpie, maybe. But you can see that it's kind of bled a little bit over the side. So it's not perfect, but I still would not give up this copy for anything because I'm pretty attached to it. And so that's why I chose this one for this prompt, because even though it's maybe not the most, you know, it's pretty clearly used, the edging job is not the greatest, it's still just a deck that I like a lot. Prompt number 9 is a playlist you've had since high school, a deck that knows all your phases and still vibes with you. And so for this one, I chose the Celtic Dragon Tarot. And the reason I chose this one is because this is my very first tarot deck that I ever got. I got it when I was maybe 15 or 16 years old, and I loved it. It was the only deck I had for a really, really long time. And when I was a teenager, I would give tarot readings to my friends, and I was kind of known for it. I thought it was so cool back then, at least doing tarot stuff. And so I have had this deck for quite a while. You know, life changed a little bit. I went to college. I kind of stopped using it, but I always kept this deck. This deck always came with me on all of my moves from different places in college, and afterwards, and jobs, and moving around the country. And so I've always kept this deck. And then, of course, I started using it again when I started getting back into tarot in 2021. And it's kind of too bad because I have a harder time using this deck now. I didn't notice it in high school, but now I definitely notice that the swords are fire and the wands are air sign. That's a little hard for me now, but I mostly get through it, and I will likely never get rid of this deck. Prompt number 10, your go-to takeout order. You don't even have to think about. A deck that just works without all the fuss. And for me, you might be kind of surprised. It is the Seed and Sickle Oracle deck. This is another deck that I have had for quite a long time. And part of what I love about it is it just goes with so many other decks. It just works. It works pretty easily. And so that's why I put it as my to-go order, because I can just use it with a lot of different things and it's fine. I know a lot of people have trouble with this deck because it doesn't have keywords and it has 2 guidebooks, but I just kind of figured out a system, and since I did that, it's worked for me. So basically for me, I just use the Dusk guidebook unless I'm actively doing a reading that is focusing on trying to achieve a goal or trying to complete something. Then I will use the Dawn guidebook, but in general, I just use the Dusk and it's fine. And yeah, I do have to look up the cards every time in the guidebook, but it's also really pretty and I like it and it goes with a lot of my decks. So I just live with that. That was the last prompt that was given for this tag, but I just wanted to do a quick honorable mention. I wanted to do a Cottage Witch Oracle honorable mention. The reason I did that, the reason I wanted to have this as an honorable mention is because this is a very cozy deck for me. It is a deck that I use a lot every year. It is one of my most used decks, and it's easy to use. The keywords are good. Oh, look, I still have Christmas in there. I clearly haven't used it since Christmas, but in general, I tend to use this deck a lot. And so I wanted to make sure I highlight this because when I'm thinking about decks that are important to what I do, a lot more Christmas, that this is one of them. And I do really love the practice of, you know, I have a bunch of the expansions, again, Christmas. And so I can kind of seasonally pick out the cards that work or not. And I'm going to tell you right after I finish this video, I'm going to go through and take out the Christmas cards and put in some more wintry spring type cards. But this is a beautiful deck, and I felt like I couldn't do sort of my cozy, favorite, easy to use decks without mentioning this one. So thanks everybody for stopping by. It was really fun to do this tag, and you know, if you have a channel or if you want to do this tag, you definitely should. I like doing tags. It's a fun way to think about my decks. I am also a new channel that is growing, so if you feel like you want to, you should subscribe to my channel or like my video. That helps me kind of grow as I keep doing this. So yeah, thanks for coming by.